Will crush you to the ground, you and your children, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. That's cheerful. They will crush you to the ground, you and your children, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. We do have a party at the beginning of our reading today from Luke, didn't we? People are singing songs. They're marching along the road. Jesus is riding a colt, and at least in the Gospel of Luke, people are laying down cloaks before him. Those of us who gather here regularly on Palm Sunday know this story in its many variations. We know it also as a form of street theater. A joyous protest with a serious message from an occupied people to their oppressors. You see, in their minds, the minds of Jesus and his followers, and in the minds of the Romans, Jesus and his friends are not just entering Jerusalem, they are invading it. They are occupying it. They are flouting and mocking authority. They are living on the edge, taking risks. They are reveling in the holiday of Passover. And yet, at the same time, in the midst of all this joyous noise, at least one of them, and I suspect more, hold a deep sadness within. In the midst of the party, in the midst of the parade and the celebration, when everyone seems to be happy, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. If you, even you, had recognized on this day, he says, the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. And today, after 5 weeks of Lenten sermons on the issues of our day, it is hard not to see how he might find some reason for lamentation. The things that make for peace, after all, aren't that hard to articulate. They boil down to those words from Paul about faith, hope, and love that we heard last week, and the command of Micah today to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. It's not complicated. However, while they are simple to say, fairly easy to conceive, they are difficult to enact. You see, there is a deep-seated tendency to do just the opposite. This season, we have talked about injustices around food and about the many layers of sickness, societal and otherwise, that the situation in Flint, Michigan, and its subsequent handling raised for those of us concerned about doing the right thing for our fellow beings. And then we talked repeatedly about language, about posturing, about the apparent need to blow one's ego out of proportion at the expense of others, that we have seen in many of the political debates, and that we see elsewhere. Wherever bullies, and let's face it, we've probably all been bullies at times, wherever bullies reside. And then last week we talked about the rage and occasional violence at campaign rallies and elsewhere. And this week we can add to the list those kids from Catholic Memorial High School in Boston telling the kids at Newton North that they have killed Jesus. These are situations that Paul, Micah, and Jesus would recognize, brought about by the shadow side of our human natures. It is enough to make them and us weep. And so when we look at the state of the world this morning, it is hard not to see the darkness. It is hard not to feel as though we have already made that journey through Holy Week as a community, as a society, and as a nation. But for many of us, the darkness goes even deeper than that. For as lone and unique human beings, we also travel through that darkness in our personal and our private lives. The musician Buddy Guy once said that if you don't think you've got the blues, then just keep living. In the midst of private struggles, the depths of which few, if any, other people will ever really know, language fails us. Our vision is clouded. Our hearing is confused, and we are lost. We get lost for a time. Lost in the valley of the shadow, and feel as though there are ramparts around us, that we are hemmed in on every side. Now, we also know that these struggles are part of being human, and that eventually we will weather the storm. But it doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't make it easier to stand up, to get going on our journey, looking for a better place to rest than the one we just left. However, there is good news. And the good news is that not all really is lost. Not really. And the reason is because even in our darkness, whatever that darkness is and wherever it comes from, we are blessed. We are blessed by a time of visitation, the breaking in of the divine. Because the fact is, we always have access to help and support from each other. We always have access in some way, shape, or form to the greatest of these, which is love. And as we walk humbly in kindness and mercy, even in our pain, we can find manifestations of a spirit of healing that will renew our hope and eventually renew our souls. But in the darkness, we do sometimes have to search a bit, don't we? And so again, we are drawn together. We are drawn to this place, to this liberal faith, to an approach, an attitude more than a creed that enables us to celebrate in the midst of hard times. We need this sense of deity, says Max Kuntz, to crack our own hard brown December husks and push life out of inner tombs and outer pain. We need this sense of deity. And he's right. He's right. Maybe our sense of deity is different from that of the person sitting next to us. But it's always different, wherever we are. It's just that in this church, in this congregation, we choose to recognize that fact and seek a connection anyway. We choose to find the goodness that resides in the human heart and in the spaces in between. Right now, we see that connection. And we see it in our country, in the general outrage and resistance to the words of hate around us. People are speaking out on the news and at public events and in the quieter places that people gather. And we see this connection when people of different opinions still cooperate in a climate that is not conducive to cooperation. When certain demagogues and purported leaders seek to spread divisions for their own gain, others step up to close and heal those divisions once again. Frequently these days, and in this country, houses of worship are at the front of acts of unification and reconciliation. People who think that organized religion has reached the end of its necessary life should look at the language and attitude of certain relatively unchurched politicians, and then at the actions of my friends and colleagues in the interfaith community who come together in the face of other people's wishes and expectations for them to work for justice, representing oppressed groups, regardless of their race, class, gender, or creed. It is telling, I think, that in our story today, after Jesus laments the condition of Jerusalem, the darkness and confusion, he enters it. He enters into the place of loss and pain, shocking them and shocking us into action. The very next time we see Jesus, he is trashing those tables at the temple. He is waking people up from their dogmatic slumbers for their and our own good, forcing those among us who have given up on ourselves and on the world to live again, to care deeply and to love, to face the fact of our own many deaths, and to face the hope of our own many resurrections. Amen.